pay $12,000 more, or you and your daughter stay home. My mother said it at the station, with the family gathered around their bags for the family healing trip to Florida. My sister barely looked up. Just pay it, Rachel. Don't ruin this for everyone. The money hurt less than the ease of it. How quickly they made my 5-year-old the price of keeping everyone else comfortable. I'm Rachel, 36, a librarian, a widow. I lifted my daughter onto my hip and carried her out, while the people who claimed they were helping us heal watched us leave. 3 hours later, Mom texted, "You can still join us," as though she were offering back something she had never taken. I turned the screen toward the man beside me. He read it twice, and his face went stone cold. He knew before I did what that message really was. He'd spent a whole career learning to read people like her, to see the shape of a thing while it was still hiding inside a kind sentence. To understand why his face changed that night, why a text that looked like an open door made a grown man go quiet. You have to come back with me. 14 months. All the way back to the worst night of my life, and everything my mother built on top of it while I wasn't looking. The Ashford Public Library smells like old paper and radiator dust. And after 11 years behind the local history desk, I stopped noticing it. People came to me to find things they'd lost. A grandfather's enlistment record, the deed to a house that burned, the maiden name of a great aunt nobody spoke of anymore. I was good at it. Give me a name and a date, and I could follow a person through decades of microfilm until they surfaced. In a town like Ashford, where the same 40 families fill the pews at Mount Zion on Sunday and the checkout line at the Food Lion off Route 15 on Monday, a mother who can't cope becomes the story before she's even out of the parking lot. I knew that. I'd watched it happen to other women. I never once imagined the story would be about me, or that my own mother would be the one telling it. Bev, who'd worked the front desk since before I was hired, used to watch me disappear into the stacks for hours. One afternoon, she set a mug of tea beside my elbow and stood there until I looked up. "You find what other people lost, Rachel," she said. "Don't lose yourself in here." I was good at finding what other people lost. I was slower, it turned out, at noticing what was quietly being taken from me. There was an envelope in my kitchen drawer at home that I'd left unopened for over a week, telling myself I'd get to it. I should have opened that envelope, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Sunday dinners at my mother's house followed a script. I stood at the sink washing the good plates while the rest of them stayed at the table, because that was my place in the family and had been for as long as I could remember. My younger sister, Nicole, sat. I washed. Nobody decided it out loud. It simply was. Diane, my mother, narrated those dinners like a woman describing her own portrait. Nicole had just been promoted. Nicole and her husband had bought a lake place. Nicole's daughter was on the honor roll. And then the subject would turn to me, and the temperature in the room would change. "We just worry about you, sweetheart," my mother would say, and the whole table would go soft and careful, the way people get around something fragile. "Mom's only trying to help," Nicole would add, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. Fragile. Difficult. Not handling things well since Daniel. Those were the words that hung on me at that table, and I'd stopped fighting them, because fighting them only seemed to prove them. The town already had a story about me, and my mother was its most devoted author. What I didn't notice, not then, was how specific her worry had become. She always knew which afternoons Lucy had preschool, which door I used at pickup, what time I got home. I thought that was love. Grandmothers are supposed to know those things. The morning of the trip, Lucy fell asleep in her car seat before we'd even cleared the county line. One small hand curled around a paper boat. Her father folded it for her the winter before he died. A fat little sailboat creased from a page of the newspaper, gone soft and gray from being carried everywhere. She took it to bed. She took it to the doctor. She took it, that morning, toward a train that would carry the whole family to Florida to heal. I drove with both hands on the wheel, and a feeling in my chest I couldn't put a name to. Nothing about the trip was wrong on paper. My mother had planned it for months. The sleeper cars, the condo near the beach, the family together for the first time since the funeral. Healing. That was the word she used, over and over, until it stopped meaning anything at all. Lucy stirred once near the halfway mark. "Is Daddy's boat coming too?" she asked, without opening her eyes. "It's right here," I told her. "It's coming." I was driving towards something I couldn't yet name. And it wasn't until we were nearly there that I let myself notice the one person who hadn't been invited on the family's healing trip. Daniel's own father, Lucy's grandfather, a man my mother never mentioned anymore. It was a Tuesday in April, and I was rinsing a pot when the doorbell rang. I remember the pot. I remember the water going cold over my hands because I forgot to turn off the tap. 2 state troopers stood on my porch with their hats already off, and a man does not take his hat off on your porch in the evening for any reason you want to hear. One of them was talking. I could see his mouth moving. Daniel, the interstate, a truck that ran the light. They did everything they could. But the words reached me half a second late, like sound coming through water. Somewhere behind me, the tap was still running. I kept thinking I should go turn it off. I kept not moving. "Ma'am," the younger one said gently, when the silence had gone on too long, "is there someone who can sit with you tonight?" There was. There were people who came. But what I remember from that night isn't the people. It's Daniel's work boots, sitting on the mat by the door where he'd stepped out of them that morning, still holding the shape of his feet. He'd meant to come home and put them back on. He was 38. We'd been married 9 years. He folded paper boats for our daughter and left his real ones by the door. And now that door would open and close 1,000 times, and he would never reach for them again. I didn't cry that first night. I picked up the boots and set them on the shelf in the hall closet, lined up neat, toes out, the way he liked. Then I closed the door on them and stood with my hand flat against the wood for a long time, because as long as the door stayed shut, they were just put away and not left behind. Those boots stayed in that closet for months, and in the fog of the weeks that followed, the casseroles, the paperwork, the phone that would not stop, someone stepped in and quietly began to handle everything for me. I was grateful. I need you to understand that. At the time, I was so grateful. For a while, my refrigerator was full of other people's grief, packed in foil and labeled with masking tape. Chicken and rice from the church, a ham from the neighbors. Things I couldn't eat and couldn't throw away, because throwing them out felt like throwing out the kindness. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie down at 10 and find myself at the kitchen table at 3, not sure how I'd gotten there. I forgot things. A dentist appointment, a library shift, Lucy's rain boots on a wet morning. Small things. The kind of things anyone forgets when their husband is 4 weeks in the ground and their 4-year-old has started waking up with questions that have no answers. "Can Daddy come home just for my birthday?" Lucy asked me one night, holding the paper boat under her chin. "Just for one day?" I told her Daddy loved her more than anything in the whole world. It wasn't an answer, and she was 4, and she knew it wasn't an answer. She turned to face the wall, and I sat on the floor of her room until she slept. I started to believe the thing everyone around me already seemed to believe, that I wasn't steady anymore, that the grief had cracked something in me that wouldn't set right. And my mother said it gently, always where someone could hear. She forgets things now, she'd murmured to Nicole, with a sad little smile, while I stood 2 feet away. Ever since Daniel, it just breaks my heart. I started to believe I wasn't steady anymore. That was the first thing she took from me, though it would be over a year before I understood it. Not the money, not even Lucy. My own trust in my own mind. And every single time I forgot something, my mother was there to point it out. Never alone, always in front of someone who would remember it later. The papers came the way everything came that spring. In a folder my mother set down on my kitchen table, with a pen already resting on top. Daniel's life insurance had paid out. Most of it I put toward the house and the bills and the years ahead. $300,000 was set aside for Lucy, for college, for whenever she'd need it. And because she was a small child, and the law won't let a child hold that kind of money, a court had to name someone to manage it until she grew up. "You can barely sleep, honey," my mother said, sliding the folder an inch closer. "You can't even look at a bank statement without your hands shaking. Let me handle the money, just until you're back on your feet." I was not on my feet. She was right about that. So I signed where the lawyer had flagged, and the court approved her to manage Lucy's account, with the duty to report on it. And I felt something I mistook for relief. One heavy thing lifted off a life that had far too many heavy things on it. I found out much later that she'd started laying the groundwork at the funeral itself. "She's not handling this well," she'd whispered, to the lawyer, to the pastor, to anyone who'd lean in, while I stood at my husband's grave. Setting the stage, casting me in the role I would play for the next 14 months, I signed. I thought it was kindness. And weeks after that, a copy of a bank letter came to my house by mistake. A statement meant for the account she was managing. The mailing address printed at the top wasn't mine. It was hers. Lucy's preschool smelled like crayons and graham crackers, and there was a clipboard by the door where every parent signed their child in and out, initials and a time, a small, honest record of who came and when. My mother started showing up there. Not to help, to be seen. She'd appear at pickup on the 2 afternoons I ran late from the library, just often enough to be witnessed being concerned. And she began to talk to Ms. Renner, the director, in that low, confiding voice she saved for an audience of exactly one. I caught the end of it once, coming around the corner with Lucy's backpack. "I'm not saying anything's wrong," my mother was saying, one hand pressed to her chest. "I just worry. She's had such a hard time. I like to keep an eye. Keep an eye. On me. On my daughter." Ms. Renner nodded along the way. You nodded a worried grandmother, because who wouldn't? I told myself it was harmless. My mother loved being the concerned one. It was practically her hobby. I signed Lucy out, initials and a time, and I did not let myself think about the fact that my mother was building something out of those low, kind, poisonous little sentences. Her worry always had an audience. That was the tell, if I'd been looking. And the very next time I picked Lucy up, Ms. Renner, who had smiled at me for 2 years, looked at me a half beat too long, and then looked away. By the new year, I was sleeping again. I'd gone back to full shifts. I could look at a bank statement without my hands shaking, which turned out to be exactly the problem. Because when I finally sat down one evening to actually look at Lucy's account, the account my mother had been managing for me, I couldn't get in. The login she'd set up returned the same gray line every time. No access. So I called her. "I'd just like to see the statements, Mom," I said. "That's all. Just to know where things stand." There was a pause on the line, the kind with a whole argument folded up inside it. "After everything I've done," she said at last, and her voice had gone thin and wounded, "I take this off your plate for a year, and now you're accusing me?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'd just like to see them. You're not well, Rachel. You know you're not well. And now you're getting paranoid on top of it. She said it the way she said everything. Gently, sadly, as if it hurt her more than it hurt me. Then she changed the subject, and when I tried to change it back, she said she had to go. She wouldn't let me look. I kept coming back to that. If everything was fine, why wouldn't she let me look? And then, the very next day, as if that one small question had tripped a wire somewhere, my mother called the whole family and announced, through happy tears, that she was finally taking us all to Florida. To heal. Grandpa Ellis makes boats, too, Lucy told me one night, out of nowhere, folding a napkin into a shape that wanted to be a boat and wouldn't hold. I went very still. Ellis, Daniel's father, Lucy's other grandfather, a man who had once been at every birthday, every Sunday, and who had somehow, over 14 months, simply faded out of our lives. I'd let it happen without noticing, the way you don't notice a room getting dark. My mother had a reason for every gap. Ellis was tired. Ellis wasn't up to the drive. Ellis said to give you your space. There was always a reason, and the reason was always coming from her. I found his number and I called him, and it rang only once. I want to tell you who Ellis is, but I'm going to let you meet him the way I did, later that week, on the worst and best night of my life. For now, all you need to know is this. When I told him Lucy missed him, his voice went rough. And when I mentioned, in passing, my mother's big trip to Florida, he was quiet for a long moment. Rachel, he said, if anything ever feels wrong, anything at all, you come to me, any hour. You understand me? I called the man my mother wanted me to forget, and I didn't yet understand why he'd said it like that. Come to me, any hour. Like a man who already knew something I didn't. In a few days, I would. The auto train terminal in Lorton is all echo and fluorescent light. A departures board clacking overhead, a loudspeaker calling boarding groups in a voice worn smooth by repetition. We got there 2 hours early, the way my mother liked, and the family gathered around a small mountain of matching luggage by the windows. I want to be honest with you about why I came at all. By then I had one splinter of doubt. The account, the gray line, no access, and nothing more. I didn't know what my mother was really doing. I came because refusing would have made me the difficult one again, and because some part of me still hoped I was wrong. You can suspect your own mother of something and still show up with your bags. Still half hope she proves you a fool. I did. My mother worked the group like a host. She hugged Nicole. She straightened my daughter's collar. This trip is about healing, she announced to no one and everyone, dabbing at her eyes. For all of us, it's what Daniel would have wanted. She had a gift for saying my dead husband's name in a way that made everyone else feel they somehow owed her. She smiled at the family. Then she turned to me, and the smile stayed on her mouth, but left her eyes. There's just one small thing about the costs, Rachel, she said, quiet now, so only I could hear. Before we all get on. She had it ready on her phone. A tidy little spreadsheet. My name in a column, a number beside it. The trip had come in higher than expected, she said. The sleeper cars, the condo, the meals for everyone. She'd covered it all up front, out of the goodness of her heart, and now it was only fair that everyone paid their share. My share, she decided, was $12,000. On top of what I'd already put in. She didn't lower her voice for that part. She raised it, just slightly, so the family could hear how reasonable she was being. Pay $12,000 more, or you and your daughter stay home. She said it like a weather report. I'm not going to let one person's attitude ruin this for the whole family. The group went quiet. Not shocked. Arranged. as if they'd all known this moment was coming and had already settled on whose side to be on. I looked at Nicole. My sister, who had a lake house and a promotion and every reason to spare me one hard look, glanced up from her phone. "Just pay it, Rachel," she said. "Don't ruin this for everyone." There it was. The whole machine, running smooth. Diane the martyr, Nicole the reasonable one, and me, the ungrateful, unstable woman making a scene at a train station over money for a healing trip, in front of the whole family. The number didn't hurt. What hurt was how easy it was for them. How quickly my 5-year-old, asleep on my hip with a paper boat in her fist, had become the price of everyone else's comfortable afternoon. The whole family waited for me to pay. Down the row of windows, a station attendant loading tags onto a cart went still, a strap hanging from his hand, watching the way strangers watch when something is wrong. I shifted Lucy higher on my hip. She sighed against my neck and didn't wake. I looked at my mother, and then at the little spreadsheet with my name in it, and I understood, finally and completely, that there was no number that would ever be enough. 12,000 today. Something else next month. It would never stop, because the money was never the point. The point was that I stayed in my place. "No," I said. "Just that. Not a speech." I'd learned a long time ago that a speech only gives them something to argue with. I set the family's shared bag down on the floor. I set my mother's printed itinerary, the one she'd handed me that morning, laminated, color-coded, down on the seat beside it, and I turned, with my daughter, toward the doors. Behind me, my mother's voice climbed. She told the family to look. Just look at what she had to deal with. She told me I was tearing this family apart. She told me Daniel would be ashamed of me. I kept walking. The doors slid open. The evening air came in warm and ordinary, smelling of asphalt and coming rain, and I carried my daughter out through them while the people who claimed they were helping us heal stood by their luggage and watched us go. I carried her through that gate and I paid nothing. On the seat behind me, my mother's beautiful laminated itinerary sat exactly where I'd left it, a plan for a trip I would never take, already peeling at one corner, like a skin I'd finally shed. Before I tell you who was waiting for me 3 hours later and what he saw on my phone, I want to ask you something. Standing in that terminal, your child asleep on your hip, the whole family watching, would you have paid to keep the peace? Or would you have walked? If you'd have carried her out too, leave me one word in the comments. Gate. I read every single one. I didn't drive home. I drove 2 hours south, to a farmhouse with a porch light left on, and by the time I turned onto the gravel, it was nearly dark, and Lucy was awake and asking where we were. We were at her grandfather's. This is the part I promised you. The man I'd called earlier that week. The man my mother had quietly erased from our lives. His name is Ellis Grady, Daniel's father, Lucy's grandfather, and for 26 years, before he retired, he sat on the bench as a family court judge. He had spent an entire working life watching people do to each other precisely what was about to be done to me. I had not gone to him by accident. I'd gone to him because there was no one on this earth who understood the machinery of a family better than Ellis did. Lucy ran to him, and he caught her up like she weighed nothing, and the first thing he did, before he asked me a single question, was pull a paper napkin from the holder on the kitchen table and start folding. Daniel used to make these when he was her age, he said, creasing the little hull with his thumb, his voice careful. Drove his mother crazy, boats in every pocket. He set it in Lucy's hands, and she laughed, and something in my chest that had been clenched since the station let go. Just a little. You always said to come if it ever felt wrong, I told him. It does. The man beside me could read my mother better than she would ever know. He poured me coffee I didn't touch, and he listened while I told him about the station, the spreadsheet, the 12,000, the whole smiling family. And as I talked, I watched his face slow down and settle into something I didn't recognize yet. Like a man matching what he was hearing against a pattern he'd seen 100 times before. My phone lit up on the kitchen table between us. A text. From my mother. 3 hours after I'd carried my daughter out of that station, as though nothing at all had passed between us. You can still join us. That was all of it. Warm, casual. An open door held out to me, as though I'd been the one to slam it, as though she were generously offering back something she had never taken. I turned the screen toward Ellis. He read it once, then he read it again, slower. And his face, the kind, tired face of a man who'd been folding paper boats for his granddaughter 2 minutes earlier, went stone cold. He didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. He hadn't seen a single document yet, but he'd spent 26 years reading exactly this. The public scene, the isolation, and then the calm, reasonable, on-the-record message that a person builds a case out of. She filed, didn't she? He said. Not a question. He wasn't surprised. He'd seen this before, from the other side of a courtroom. He set my phone down very gently, the way you set down something that has become evidence, and he looked at me. Rachel, he said, has anyone come to your door with papers? The coffee had gone cold in my hands, and I still hadn't taken a sip. Ellis walked me through it, the way you'd walk someone through the wreck of their own car. Quietly, so the shock has room to land. The text wasn't kindness, he said. It was construction. A woman who wants to look reasonable for a judge sends exactly that message, 3 hours after a scene she engineered, so that later she can hold up her phone and say, "Look how I reached out. Look how unstable she is. She wouldn't even come." And the station itself, he said, the public demand, the whole family arranged around me like a jury, that had never been about $12,000. They don't stage a scene like that for money, he said. They stage it for a file. She wanted you to break in front of witnesses, or pay, and stay in line. You did neither. So now she needs the file to do the work instead. I thought about the preschool. Ms. Renner's face. My mother's gentle public worry, repeated for 14 months to anyone who would listen. The account I couldn't see. It stopped being a series of small, strange things. It became one thing, and I'd been living inside it without a name for it. He named the thing I hadn't dared to. Then Ellis reached across the table for his laptop, pulled it toward him, and his voice went very level. "Let me pull the docket," he said. "Let's find out exactly what your mother filed. And when." The screen threw a pale light across Ellis's face as the county's court records loaded. It did not take long to find. My name was on it. So was Lucy's. A petition, filed 11 days before the station. 11 days before my mother stood in that terminal and demanded $12,000 in front of everyone I was related to. An emergency petition for guardianship of a minor. My mother was asking a court to take my daughter's care out of my hands and put it into hers. Not the money she already controlled. The child. Lucy herself. And there was a line in the record about service. A process server had come to my house, on an afternoon I'd been at the library, and left the papers. The papers I had never seen. The envelope, I went cold all over. The envelope I'd shoved in a kitchen drawer more than a week ago and told myself I'd get to. For over a week I had been carrying the notice of my own daughter's guardianship case around my kitchen, unopened, telling myself it could wait. Ellis scrolled, and then he stopped, because he'd reached the part where my mother explained, in her own words, why the court should give her my child. I made him let me read it myself. "The mother is emotionally unfit," I read out loud, in a voice I didn't recognize. "Unstable since the death of her husband. Prone to forgetting the child's basic needs." I had to stop. She wrote this. About me. Every gentle, sad public sentence of the last 14 months was in that document, dressed up in legal language and handed to a judge as fact. She didn't want the money. She wanted my child. And the date at the top of the petition told me the rest. She had filed first and staged the station second. The scene at the terminal wasn't the beginning of anything. It was evidence she was collecting for a case that was already quietly underway. It took a lawyer's letter and a court order to pry loose the statements my mother had hidden behind that gray line. Within the week, they were spread across Ellis's kitchen table, and a forensic accountant named Owen Marsh was moving a pen down the columns like a man reading a fever chart. Because my mother had been court-appointed to manage Lucy's money, she'd been required to file reports on it. Owen laid her reports next to the real bank records, and the two did not match. They didn't come close. Over 14 months, $68,000 had left my daughter's account. Not for Lucy. There were withdrawals dressed up as care expenses and educational costs, for a child in preschool, mind you, that had gone somewhere else entirely. Owen followed each one until it surfaced in my mother's own spending. Restaurants, a cruise deposit, a new roof. And then his pen stopped on one line, and he circled it in red. And he looked up at me. "This deposit here," he said, tapping the red circle. "That's the Sanford trip. The condo, the sleeper cars, all of it. Rachel, she paid for the healing trip out of Lucy's account. $18,000 of your daughter's money." I had to get up and walk to the window. Somewhere in that house, Lucy was asleep with her paper boat, and downstairs on the table was the proof that my mother had stood in a train station and demanded $12,000 from me for a trip she had already paid for with my dead husband's insurance money. Money that belonged to his daughter. She had stolen from Lucy to build the trip, and then tried to bill me for the seat. The healing trip was paid for with my daughter's money, and clipped to the back of the folder was a receipt for the Florida condo in my mother's name, dated the exact afternoon she'd called the whole family to announce, through happy tears, that she was finally taking us all away to heal. The last folder was the one that broke something in me, and it broke quietly. It was my mother's evidence, the case she'd assembled to prove me unfit. Ellis spread it across the table, a signed statement from Ms. Renner, the preschool director, about a mother who seemed overwhelmed. A log, in my mother's own handwriting, of every time I had forgotten something over 14 months. Dates, times, little notes in the margin. 2 more declarations, from people at that Sunday table, describing a woman coming apart. I sat there and read 14 months of my own life told back to me as a symptom. The dentist appointment I missed the month Daniel died. The rain boots. Every small human grieving thing a person does. Written down, saved, and stacked, because someone had decided at the funeral that this was the story, and then spent a year making it true. She didn't watch me fall apart, I said. My voice didn't shake. It went flat, which was worse. She built it. All that time I thought I was losing my mind. She was writing it down. That was the theft that hurt more than $68,000. For over a year I had believed I was broken. I had apologized for it. I had let it shrink me. And it had never been true. It had been a project. Ellis gathered the pages back into their folder, squared the edges, and set his hand flat on top of it. "Listen to me," he said. "A judge will see through this. I've seen 100 of them. But only if you let it reach a judge. Only if you don't try to fix it yourself first." The funeral line was the first move. She's not handling this well, murmured over my husband's grave, had never been grief. It had been the opening play of a 14-month game to take my daughter. And now, at last, I could see the whole board. The only question left was what I was going to do with it. A guardian ad litem is the person a court appoints to speak for the child, to figure out, independent of either side, what is actually best for her. Ours was a woman named Patricia Hale, and she came to my house on a Thursday with a soft voice and no agenda I could find. I'd braced myself for someone who had already read my mother's file and made up her mind. Instead, Patricia Hale got down on the floor. She didn't ask Lucy a single hard question. She noticed the paper boat in Lucy's hand, the soft gray one, and she smiled. "That's a fine boat," she said. "Will you show me how it floats?" They filled a mixing bowl at my kitchen sink and floated that boat for 20 minutes while I stood back and tried to remember how to breathe. Lucy told her that Daddy made it. Patricia listened like it was the most important thing anyone had told her all week. Before she left, Patricia Hale looked at me. Really looked, the way Ellis had. And she was honest with me, which I had not expected. "I want you to understand how I work," she said at the door. "I don't take anyone's word, not your mother's, and not yours. I'll be talking to everyone, the preschool, the doctor, the bank, all of it. Wherever the truth is, that's where I'll land." Someone was finally going to go looking for the truth. Really looking, with the authority to actually find it. And she just told me she would be talking to everyone, including my mother. I found to my own surprise that the thought didn't scare me at all. It should have scared my mother. Back at the library, my hands shook the first morning. Not from grief now, but from the sheer size of what I was carrying. Bev saw it before I'd even hung up my coat. She didn't ask. Bev had worked that front desk for 30 years. She could read a person the way I read microfilm. She just tilted her head toward the second floor. "Family law's up on the second floor, honey," she said. "I already pulled it. Set it on the study table by the window. Figured you'd want the quiet corner." She'd known. Somehow, in a town where everyone knew everything, Bev had known enough to say nothing and do this instead. So I did what I do. I sat in the quiet corner and I researched. Statutes, standards, what a court actually weighs when a grandparent tries to take a child from a fit parent. And what I found steadied me. The law starts on the parent side. A court does not hand a child to a grandmother because the grandmother wants one. It takes real proof of an unfit mother. My mother did not have a real one. She had a manufactured one. There is a difference, and a courtroom is built to find it. And I made a decision, in that corner, that I would not give her the one thing she needed most. I would not fall apart. Every unanswered call, every gentle poisonous voicemail, I let go straight to the record, and I did not answer. A calm woman is a very hard thing to call unstable. I find what other people lose. This time I was finding it for myself. And even as I built my quiet, careful case, my mother's messages began to change. Softer now, sweeter, almost loving. As if she'd sensed the ground shift under her and was trying, one text at a time, to pull me back off the trail. The choice came down to a phone lying face down on Ellis's kitchen table, and whether or not I picked it up. I could call my mother. That's the thing a good daughter does, isn't it? Gives her a way out. I could tell her I knew everything, tell her to withdraw the petition and put the money back, and let it end quietly. No courtroom, no family torn open in front of a judge. Part of me wanted that. Part of me still wanted to protect her, which is its own kind of sickness, when the person you're protecting is the one holding the knife. Ellis watched me look at the phone. He didn't tell me what to do. You can warn her, he said quietly. And she'll pull the petition, and she'll apologize, and she'll wait until you're not looking and try again. Cleaner next time. Or you can leave it alone, and let the record do what records do. He paused. I've watched people choose both. I'll stand with you either way. I thought about the log in her handwriting. 14 months of my grief turned into a weapon. I thought about Lucy, floating a paper boat in a mixing bowl for the woman who'd come to decide her future. And I understood that warning my mother wouldn't be mercy. It would just be handing her a chance to do it better next time. Then we let it reach the judge, I said. I set the phone back down, face down, and I did not pick it up. I would not trap her. I wouldn't need to. I would simply stop doing the one thing I had done my entire life. I would stop covering for her. I chose not to cover for her. So I said nothing. And my mother, certain as ever that I was still the frightened, foldable woman she'd written about, kept walking straight toward the hearing she had asked for, carrying, without knowing it, every single piece of evidence that would end her. The texts came in a flood the week before the hearing, and I saved everyone. My mother had 2 voices now, and she switched between them by the hour. In the morning she was wounded and sweet. I'm your mother, Rachel. None of this had to happen. Just come and talk to me. By afternoon she was something harder. She reminded me she had years of concerns documented. She reminded me who the family would believe. And more than once she floated the idea that Lucy should come stay with her for a few days before the hearing. A little trip, just the 2 of us, to make up for Florida. I did not let my daughter out of my sight. I'm her grandmother, one message said. A judge is going to see a devoted grandmother and a mother who can't even keep it together. Think about that before you embarrass this whole family in a courtroom. I read it twice, the way Ellis had read hers, and I felt something that wasn't fear at all. Every threat she typed into the record. She thought she was frightening me. She was signing a confession. And then, buried in the middle of one long, furious message about how much she had sacrificed, she did the thing that would matter most. She put it in writing. She reminded me, in a text, with a date and a time stamped beside it, that I still owed the family $12,000 for the trip. Every text she sent was another line in the record. She was building my case for me, one message at a time, and she had no idea. All that was left was to gather it, the texts, the statements, the numbers, and carry it into a room. By the night before the hearing, the whole thing fit into a single black binder, tabbed and ordered, sitting in the middle of Ellis's table under the low kitchen light. My lawyer, Adrian Vance, walked through it one last time, and she did it with her hands, not a speech, sliding each tab into place, the bank statements and Owen Marsh's report, here. My mother's own filed reports that didn't match them, here. The screenshots of her texts, the 12,000 in writing, here. And the thing that would matter most, a signed corrected statement from Ms. Renner, because Patricia Hale, the guardian ad litem, had gone to that preschool and asked her plain, quiet questions, and Ms. Renner had folded like wet paper. She kept pushing me to write things down, Renner admitted, that the mother seemed overwhelmed. I never actually saw anything wrong. I'm sorry. I let her lead me. Ellis didn't coach me on what to feel. He coached me on how a hearing runs, when to speak, when to let Adrian speak, when to simply let a document sit in the silence and do its own work. And a clerk, hearing that a 5-year-old would be in the building, quietly set up a corner of the family room with crayons and paper, so Lucy would have somewhere soft to wait. The truth did not need me to shout it. It only needed to be read. Adrian closed the binder and looked at me across the table. When her own words go into the record, she said, she'll do the rest herself. That night, After Lucy was asleep and the binder was closed, I sat on the edge of the guest bed in the dark with a paper boat on the nightstand and my phone in my hand. And I did the one thing I only let myself do when no one could see. There's a voicemail I have never deleted. Daniel left it 14 months ago, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, from the road, an hour before a truck ran a red light and took him off it forever. I have listened to it more times than I will ever admit, always alone, always at night, and I pressed play again in that quiet borrowed room while my daughter slept a wall away. His voice filled the room, easy and unhurried, the sound of the highway behind it, with no idea in the world what was coming. Hey, it's me. Almost home. Running a little late. Tell Lucy I'll be there for stories. Give her a kiss for me. And Rachel, love you both. See you soon. See you soon. He had folded her a boat out of the newspaper and left his real ones by the door and said, see you soon. And then he hadn't come home. And for 14 months, his own daughter's grandmother had used the hole he left behind to try to take that little girl away. I don't cry easily. I hadn't cried at the station, or over the petition, or over the $68,000. But I sat in that dark room with his voice still hanging in the air, and I pressed the phone flat to my chest with both hands, and I let myself, just that once, come apart quietly, where it couldn't be used against me. Then I wiped my face, and I set the phone down, and I picked up the boat. I held that soft gray thing in my hands until the shaking stopped. Daniel had made it for her. Tomorrow, I would make sure no one could take her. I turned off the light, and I slept. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Pale wood, gray carpet, a flag in the corner, and my mother in the second row, with her back very straight and a handkerchief folded in her lap. She had dressed for the part. Soft cardigan, a little gold cross at her throat. The very picture of a devoted grandmother wronged by an ungrateful child. Nicole sat beside her. My mother did not look at me once. Her lawyer stood first and told the judge a story I knew by heart. A tragic accident. A young widow who never recovered. A child slipping through the cracks of a mother who simply couldn't cope. A grandmother stepping in, out of love, to do what had to be done. He told it well. He had clearly believed every word of it. Then my mother took the stand, and she was good. Her voice trembled in exactly the right places. She dabbed at her eyes. I only ever tried to protect that little girl, she said, looking right at the judge. That's all a grandmother wants, to keep her grandbaby safe. I sat still and let her talk. Adrian had told me to. Every word my mother spoke was a door, and behind each one was a room full of paper waiting to open. She told her version, start to finish, and the room believed a devoted grandmother, right up until she finished. Then the guardian ad litem, Patricia Hale, opened a folder on the table in front of her. Not my mother's folder, her own. The one she had built by talking to everyone. It came apart fast. Adrian stood. She had the bank records. $68,000, gone from Lucy's account. She laid the real statements beside my mother's filed reports. They didn't match. Not one page. My mother's lawyer objected. The judge let it in. These are care expenses, my mother said from the stand. Her voice was still steady. Everything I spent was for Lucy. Adrian slid one page forward. A cruise deposit. Another. A new roof. Another. A condo in Sanford, Florida. $18,000. Paid the same afternoon my mother told the family she was taking us all away to heal. You billed your own daughter $12,000, Adrian said, for a trip you had already paid for with your granddaughter's money. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then they called Ms. Renner. The preschool director did not last 2 minutes. She had a corrected signed statement, and she read the part that mattered. Mrs. Pruitt asked me to write down that the mother seemed overwhelmed, Renner said, not looking at my mother. I never saw anything wrong. I let her lead me. I'm sorry. And then the clerk read the texts into the record. My mother's own messages, in my mother's own words, in a flat clerk's voice that stripped every ounce of charm out of them. Pay $12,000 more, or you and your daughter stay home. The room was very quiet. Her own words, read aloud. In front of the judge, in front of Nicole, in front of the whole family she had assembled to watch me fall. And for the first time in 14 months, I watched my mother's face, that soft, sorrowful, practiced face, crack straight down the middle. That was when she stopped performing. Adrian laid out the last of it for the judge. The log in my mother's handwriting, 14 months of a grieving woman's ordinary days, recorded and saved to build a case. The coached statements, the petition, filed 11 days before the station, and the scene at the station staged to feed it. Not a worried grandmother. A plan. A long, patient, documented plan to take a child, and the money that came with her. My mother came off the stand talking. Her lawyer reached for her arm and she pulled it away. After everything I've done for that child, her voice wasn't soft anymore. It was high and hard, and it filled the whole room. After everything I gave up, you ungrateful, this is how you... The judge told her to sit down, and I want you to notice something, because I noticed it right then, in that room. For 36 years, I had called her Mom. I had called her Mom through every gentle cruelty, every public worry, every knife she slid in with a sad little smile. But sitting in that courtroom, watching Diane Pruitt scream at a judge about everything she was owed for stealing my daughter's future, I stopped. She wasn't Mom in that room. She was a woman named Diane, who had done a thing, and the thing had a name. And the name was not love. Diane broke her own mask. No one had to reach over and tear it off. She did it herself, with her own voice, in the room she had chosen. And across the aisle, my sister Nicole, who had told me to just pay it, who had shrugged while our mother put a price on my child, sat frozen, her eyes moving around that courtroom, and for the first time in her whole life she did not open her mouth to defend our mother. The judge did not take long. She had the guardian ad litem's report. She had the numbers. She had heard Diane Pruitt with her own ears. The petition is denied, she said. Denied. The word landed in that room like a stone dropped into still water. Diane was removed as the manager of Lucy's Money that same day. The court opened a separate referral into the $68,000, the kind of referral that brings its own consequences in its own time, and my daughter stayed exactly where she had always belonged, with me. My mother had built her whole life on being believed, on being the good one, the devoted one, the grandmother the whole family rallied around. And she lost it, not to a shouting match, not to revenge, but to a neat stack of her own paper, in front of the exact people whose belief she had spent a lifetime collecting. I didn't look at her as I left. I walked out with a court envelope in my hand, a copy of the order, my daughter's name printed on it, and for the second time that season, I walked through a set of doors and did not look back. If you've made it this far, you already know this was never really about $12,000. So before I tell you the last of it, tell me your story. Was there someone in your family who tried to write your life for you and hand it to the world as fact? I read the comments, all of them. And if this one reached you, subscribe and stay a while. There's a paper boat I still need to tell you about. It's the first week of July now. The windows are open, and the paperwork is still not finished. That's the part nobody warns you about. The judge's order came fast. Everything after it comes slow. The court confirmed me as Lucy's only guardian and stripped my mother of the account. But getting the $68,000 back, that is a process, still grinding along in offices I will never see. I don't speak to my mother. I don't speak to Nicole either, though I hear she's asking questions now, quietly, the kind of questions that come too late to fix anything. Some doors you close and leave closed. Ellis comes on Sundays. He and Lucy sit at my kitchen table and fold boats out of whatever's handy. Newspaper, napkins, the torn corner of the grocery list. And my daughter's laugh fills a house that had gone quiet for a very long time. And a few days after the hearing, my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Bryn, Nicole's daughter, 14 years old, who had heard the grown-ups talking. "I saw what Grandma did," she wrote. "I don't want to be like them." I looked at that message for a long time. Then I typed back the only thing that was true. You already aren't. No reconciliation. No grand family healing. But one thin thread, reaching back to me from the next generation, entirely on its own. That I could hold on to. Last weekend I took Lucy to the water. Not Florida. Not a healing trip somebody priced and printed and laminated. Just the two of us. An hour's drive to a little lake with a wooden dock, because she asked, and because I could, and because no one on this earth needed to approve it first. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she'd asked in the car, the soft gray boat in her lap. "Anywhere we want," I told her. And for the first time in a very long time, that was simply true. At the end of the dock, she crouched down and set her father's paper boat on the water. It was too soft to last. It had been carried and slept with and loved half to pieces. It floated there a moment on the still surface, gray against the blue, and then it began, gently, to take on water and sink. Lucy watched it go without crying. "Bye, boat," she said. "Bye, Daddy's boat." And she slipped her hand into mine. I thought about the station, about carrying her out through those doors with nothing but her weight on my hip and no idea what was waiting for us. I had walked through that gate because I was running from a trap I couldn't yet see. I don't walk through doors like that anymore because I'm running. I walk through them because I've chosen what's on the other side. Some things they can take. The money, the years, the version of you they hand to the world. But some things you keep. You keep your daughter's hand in yours at the end of a dock. And you keep the record, the true one, for as long as you ever need it. We drove home the long way. Lucy slept the whole ride, one hand open and empty on her lap. And this time, I didn't.